Good morning. Couple things here. There's no school today. I got all dressed up, came to school. Great weather we're having this week. But what I'm going to do is I'm still working on the pace now since we've missed 4 days of school, or 3 days, I guess. I'm going to do all of Chapter 18 lecture today for those of you that listen to my lectures, and even for my own hour that I have used. I'm going to be gone the next Monday and Tuesday, so I'm trying to get ahead of this a little bit. Your reaction quiz I will post Friday, and then your quiz I will probably post Friday or Monday, and just have you guys complete all that stuff by Tuesday. Everything's going to be slid back a little bit. We might move the first test here a couple days. I'll look through that, but I'm going to really focus on Chapter 18 today, the progressive error. I'm going to do all of it in one setting today, so there won't be part A, part B, part C. It'll be all of it today. Like I said, my goal is to get through it. That way I don't have to stop, go, and then with the weather and everything, hopefully we can get it all figured out. And there's no one in this room, so I'm only talking to you on the camera, but I will have the PowerPoint up just for my purposes to help with how it's going. Focus questions for this section, Chapter 8. Why was the city such a central element in progressive America? How did the labor and women's movements expand the meanings of American freedom? And what days of progressive include both democratic and anti-democratic impulses? And how did the progressive presidents foster the rise of the nation state? Okay, so the first slide here, as far as introduction. March 25th, 1911, Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire. If you've taken any of my other American history classes, I always highlight this briefly. Here, 7,500 workers, mostly young Jewish women and Italian immigrants, toiled on sewing machines. Doors were locked to prevent unauthorized bathroom breaks and thefts. Today, those of you that tried to go to the bathroom to get on your phones, you weren't allowed to do this. You were literally trapped in where you were working until you had mandatory, or not mandatory, but regulated breaks. Ladders only reached up 6 stories. In short, fire caught out. Women are trapped. They can't get out. At the end of the day, 100 bodies found inside, and had 46 jumped from where they were at. Brought attention to social injustice and working conditions in the working environment. And this is really where progressivism will start to take hold, or really not take hold, but like you'll see a huge movement in working conditions of progressivism at this point. And progressivism, in short, was just basically this movement in the United States to reform several critical areas in the country, not just limited to work-based condition, but government reform, women's rights, government reform, democracy change. So there was a lot of elements that the progressives are going to push for and get accomplished in their time. Now, urban and consumer society, farms and cities, explosive economic growth rose by 85% during this period. Last time that cities and farms grew together, because after this point, cities are going to grow, farms are going to decrease, and there's going to be a massive rural migration out, going to the cities, to the populated areas. Cities became the focus of the progressive politics. Stark urban inequalities. You're not going to see that as much in the rural communities because of the farming dynamic, but really what you're going to start to see here now is cities are going to take center stage in America, and they're really going to have huge impacts. And primarily, you're going to see like New York City. Immigrant families lived in tenements, no electricity or indoor toilets, pretty bad conditions, even for this period. 3 miles north on Fifth Avenue's million-dollar rows stood mansions that you can't even think about. J.P. Morgan's financial firm directly or indirectly controlled 40% of all financial and industrial capital in the United States. So you literally go 3 miles north from the urban center of New York City, where a lot of these tenement families lived, high-rises if you want to think of them. Go 3 miles north, it's like going from here to like McDonald's almost, you could say, here in Rockport. Then you have these huge mansions that have electricity, indoor plumbing. So you have a drastic difference of lifestyle. What's going to be born out of this inequality and all the rich being super rich is going to be called the muckrakers. The muckrakers, think about it as like raking through muck. They're going to be crusading journalists, and unlike some modern journalists, and I'm not going to attack the media, I'm not saying that. The muckrakers really were objective. They might have been out to make a name for themselves, but they're really going to go after some of these big businesses and expose the practices that they're doing. Corporate greed undermined traditional American values to some, and thus these journalists are going to go after them, including women journalists. More than 2 million children under the age of 15 work for wages, which is astronomical. A new generation of journalists writing for mass circulation national magazines expose the ills of industry and urban life. Theodore Roosevelt called it muckraking, the use of journalist skills to expose the underside of American life. And Lincoln Stevens exposed how party bosses and business leaders profited from political corruption. And also a book that I've talked about before in other classes, Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, about meatpacking. So you're going to start to see these journalists like Stevens, Sinclair, Ida Turnbull, who's going to go after Standard Oil. They're going to focus on exposing truths to the American people. And it's really going to start to shift perspective, and the progressives are going to be able to gain a footing. An urban and consumer society, slide 2. Immigration as a global process. Immigration was a character of the cities. Cities were very much flavored, meaning between 1901 and 1914, some 13 million immigrants came to the United States, Italy, Russia, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. People that were wanting freedom or avoiding drafts or whatever it may be came to the United States. You go to the cities, and you're going to have that flair. You're also going to have the flair of 40, 50 years ago immigrants, whether it was Germans or the Irish or the Scots that came and filled those roles in cities. Like if you've seen the movie or heard of the movie Gangs of New York, they go into that immigrant and those people that were born in the United States that were from immigrants in that period and how tense it was. So you go back a bigger step, 1840 to 1914, 40 million people immigrated to the United States. So you're going to have a melting pot literally of different classes, people that don't speak the same language. It's going to be an interesting area, needless to say. Causes of immigration were poverty, political turmoil, economic downturns. Most will enter through Ellis Island, and most of them will actually end up in the New York East Coast area. Between 1910 and 1940, Angel Island in San Francisco served as the main immigration for the West. However, it will never reach the levels of the East because, as if you study American history, we greatly limit the amount of Chinese immigration in the United States. The immigration quest for freedom came for freedom, equality before the law. They could worship as they please, enjoy his economic opportunity, and be emancipated from the oppressive social hierarchies. Though life sucked in the United States at the time, they were emancipated from the traditional hierarchies they were confined to in Europe. Or, in some cases, we did not have a mandatory draft at this point. Military service, which some people don't even think about. Places such as the New German Empire, Austrian-Hungarian, etc., military service was mandatory. So this is an opportunity for those people to escape their plights. Now, Jews were permanent immigrants in their mind. They were always constantly on the move, and the Jewish people, if you study them, have always been oppressed for one reason or another. And they're always on the move, it seems like, until recent years. Birds of passage, those who only remain temporarily in the United States to work for a period and go back. There's a lot actually do that. I don't remember the statistic on that, but there's more than people would realize. New immigrants clustered in close ethnic neighborhoods, and this is where you're going to get the Little Italy, Little China or Chinatown, Little Italy, and so forth. In New York City, San Francisco will really highlight those little urban centers. Today, cities have more of a Hispanic feel. I know in Omaha there's an area that's almost like Little Mexico, as they call it, just because that's just where a lot of those immigrants, those people cluster, because they cluster together, because they have a commonality. Now, consumer freedom. Moving to, before I move on, if you're following along in the PowerPoint, up here at the top you got a picture of Ellis Island at the top and Angel Island at the bottom right. Drastically two different islands. Ellis Island's flat, lots of buildings. Angel Island is very rocky, kind of like the Pacific Coast, much different aspect. Okay, an urban consumer society 3. Consumer freedom. Mass consumption society was born in this period. Rise of department stores, chain stores, electric sewing machines, washing machines, vacuum cleaners, and record players will start to come out. It's not what we will have in the 1950s, if you study American history, as we'll get to later on. But you have the birth of consumer freedom, people buying products to help their daily lives. Department stores, one of the big department stores you'll start to see here is, you'll have Sears and Roebuck, which, if you've been following it now, Sears is pretty much dead. Company that did not evolve with the times. Unlike Barnes & Noble and Best Buy, who were old stalwarts of an older generation that have managed to survive. These department stores that we think of this time, I think this might be predate Macy's a little bit, but you're going to have these big stores lining downtown cities such as New York, etc. Those are things that are past in American history, but they were going to dominate, and that's where people want to go buy stuff. Electric sewing machines, Singer. You're going to have Singer sewing machines that are going to be prominent, people that want items like that, and they're going to be used heavily in factory use, obviously, as well. But whole consumer products now, just think of it as Black Friday on steroids then. Leisure activities, amusement parks, theaters, dance halls will emerge. Dance halls are popular. Theaters, we're talking about live play productions. You'll have the Nickelodeons, or those small theaters where silent films are shown, that will start to rise at this period. But that's really a little bit too soon for movie theaters. If you think today, those won't come about to the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Amusement parks, simple music parks, pools and stuff will come about. So you see a whole different shift in American prosperity. The working woman, the rise of women in public sphere will come out. Immigrant women were kept in low-paid jobs such as seamstresses. We talk about with that fire at the beginning, that was a lot of immigrants there. Office workers, telephone operators, and this is going to be limited to race, whites. The old telephone, if you've never seen it, switchboard. You literally pull a cable and you connect one to the other. This was a job that it's done away with. We don't really need it anymore, obviously. But women would literally change if someone was calling to connect them to another line. Daughters considered parents of old-fashioned if they didn't let them go out alone and gave them a curfew. Women, you're going to start to push the boundaries at this point more heavily than you ever did. So this leads to our fourth slide with urban and consumer society. After the working woman, you have the rise of Fordism. Henry Ford is going to establish the Ford Motor Company in 1905 after a lot of struggles and overcoming the established motor companies at the time. He was really a rogue, and the people didn't like him in the motor industry. He used a moving assembly line. He's credited with creating the assembly line. But why they don't like him is because he violates what they had established. He brings the Model T and his Ford to everyday Americans. He paid his workers high wages, good hours. People wanted to work for him. So he was revolutionary. He kept care of his workers, didn't work them to death, gave them benefits, but also he made a cheap vehicle that was dependable. And he's really, obviously, Ford's going to flourish from this period. The economic system based on mass production, mass consumption came to be known as Fordism, and I'd remember that term, Fordism, about this mass consumption and mass production. In short, Ford believed if you produce things cheaply, kept them cheap, and produced a lot of it, people were going to buy it. And for the most part, that's what the Model T and the Ford vehicles did. Now other companies are going to produce this the same model, but that's also, when we get to the Great Depression, it's going to be a problem that's going to plague American society as well. Okay, moving on. The prominence of abundance. One last point there. In terms of living wage, American standard of living came to use. So we have a living wage today, which is you can provide for your family and live comfortably. And then a standard of living is, what's your standard of living? Are you poor? Are you middle class? Are you high class? Those are words that become predominant in American vocabulary at this point. All right, moving on to varieties of progressivism. The immediate task in the progressive view was humanization, industrial capitalism, and find common ground in society, still rocked by conflict with labor, experiencing massive immigration from abroad. So they're going to look, how do we improve society in different areas? And there's going to be different progressive thoughts, so it's not going to be limited to one area. Industrial freedom, scientific management. Frederick Taylor, thoughts through scientific study. Taylor believed that the best way of producing goods could be determined by and implemented by scientific method, precise methods on how to do stuff. The role of worker was to obey the detailed instructions of supervisors, so it's like A to B to C, very detailed, specific, it's scientific, it's measured, and it was much more, basically it's streamlining stuff and being efficient, as we would think of it today. Workers saw this as a loss of freedom, and they thought they were being marginalized, which I could agree to that. The socialist presence in Eugene Debs. The socialists are going to come to the United States at this period, or start to formulate. Karl Marx's writing obviously came about in the late 1800s. The Socialist Party in 1901 called for immediate reforms such as free college education. That is something that is still very much propagated here in the United States. Legislation to improve the condition of laborers, and as an ultimate goal, democratic control of the economy through public ownership of railroads and factories. One of the stalemate, the tent poles of socialism is the government controls. They say public ownership, but it's really the government owns. and controls all major industry at this time. Factories and railroads were the main ones. So that's what they're pushing for. It will never happen, but that you can see where they thought they might amass appeal to a lot of people. By 1912, some 150,000 due paid members were part of the Socialist Party. They'll never become a majority, but they definitely have a presence that even to this day endures on, and it's been renamed various things. Eugene V. Debs, railroad union leader, crisscrossed the country for 2 decades, preaching the control of the economy by a democratic government, or the socialist thing, as he would call it, democratic socialism, whatever you want to label it. He will actually be jailed during World War I, which I think we'll talk about that more later. But he'll be the vocal leader of the Socialist Party in the United States for that period. You'll have, moving on to Varieties Progressive number 2, AFL and the IFW, American Federation of Labor, AFL, saw membership triple to 1.16 million and between 1901 and 1904. That's also, you think about it, if you look at presidential-wise, that's the rise of Teddy Roosevelt, which he really supported unions and really attacked big business and trust. Industrial Workers of the World, IWW, formed due to being rejected from the all-white AFL, and that would be minorities across the board. Advocated a worker revolution that would seize the means of production. Now, the IWW, more socialist leaning. If you look at and study Karl Marx, proletariat, the poor revolting, that's a main thing that they advocate. The new immigrants on strike. Immigrant workers' strikes brought the right of collective bargaining at the forefront of the reform agenda. Lawrence, Massachusetts in 1912 enacted a 54-hour work week limitation. Employers reduced salaries. Workers instantly went on strike. So though you have a more realistic approach to things, you're still not going to make everyone happy. Strikes sent kids out to town in New York and had them walk to Fifth Avenue trying to show the plight of the worker. There was a wave of sympathy after this. Governor of Massachusetts stepped in at the strike, was settled, and on the workers' terms. So basically, these workers are going to go on strike, and they're like, hey, these are fair deals, but they're going to send their kids out marching, and people are going to see them walk down Fifth Avenue, down these mansions, all these places, and it works. The wave of sympathy convinces people we need to help the workers more. Labor and civil unions, or civil liberties, which is moving on to Varieties of Progressive and Pay, slide number 3. Courts generally rejected the claims of workers to openly speak or express their concerns against their businesses. You'll start at this point, though, to have the courts generally start to back workers, but it's going to be slow, and it's not going to be overnight. Also, you're going to have the rise of new feminism. Forthright attack on traditional roles of sexual behavior. Isadora Duncan, new expansive dance based on free movement of a body, liberated from the constraints of traditional technique and costume. If you look at it and watch any video, it's very flowy, very lacy, a very provocative dance. But you're going to start to see women start to express themselves more and more in this period. Free sexual expression and reproductive control emerge as well. You're gonna have the birth control movement, and this is, people don't want to admit it, this is where the birth of Planned Parenthood is going to come from. Margaret Sanger began a column on sex education, advertised birth control devices, and this is where you're going to have the early incarnations of abortion and other things that are going to come very paramount in the country. Those are still obviously very, very controversial to this day, and I'm not going to go any further detail on that. But you're going to have, at this point, a lot of changes and stuff happen in the United States in this movement, and it's going to be born. Not necessarily going to gain mainstream appeal, but it's definitely going to appeal to women who are looking to express themselves. Okay, the politics of progressivism, slide number 1. Effective freedom. Progressives was also an international movement. It was not limited to the United States. They looked to social legislation examples from the old world. They sought to regenerate the idea of an activist, social, conscious government, meaning the government works for the people and is for the people. State and local reforms. Most of the areas reforms came from local and state governments. Now, there is going to be some big overarching things that will come from the progressive movement at the federal level, but most of it's actually going to occur at the state and local level. Work to reform the structure of government to reduce the power of political bosses, establish public control of natural monopolies, improve public transportation. raise taxes, spend more money on schools, parks, and public facilities. And if you think about it, the bulk of the money that comes for our local schools is a local tax. So these are things that are going to be reformed at this point, and this is going to be a rise of public education as well. Progressives in the West, William Urin, a lawyer and founder of the Oregon system, which included the initiative of referendum as a direct legislation, meaning you have a referendum that is proposed and put on the ballots and people directly vote. This is the most democratic element of the United States. We directly vote on something that we want changed. You've heard me talk about many times, America is a republic. We have elements of democracy, and if people start talking about democratic republic, it's stupid. We're a republic with elements of democracy scattered throughout. Inherently, a republic has that as well. But we're going to reform things and make things a little bit more democratic and move a little bit more away from the republic element. And that's where you have the referendum. And the most common referendums you've seen is marijuana, where the voters directly vote on the marijuana if they want to legalize it, medical marijuana, etc. Missouri had this medical marijuana the last year. Colorado obviously had recreational. So those are areas that the referendum has been, pretty effective. Robert M. Lafolte, direct primary system. So up until this point, you had people that would be nominated for their party with little input from the common folk to represent them. We'll pause for 30 seconds and let this song continue. Okay. And what you see here is you have the ability for common people to vote for everyday politicians. So Robert was a governor of Wisconsin, I believe. And essentially what they did was they'd have a primary where people would run from the party. So 3 people from the Republican or Democratic Party would run. And now you could pick from those 3 to be the primary candidate. So it was a lot more democratic element. Still a Republican element far as a republic where you elect representatives for you, but now you can pick amongst a group instead of just having a fight amongst the elites. So that's a pretty good thing, and we have it today in the United States. That is very much now a bedrock of our election system. Progressive democracy wanted to return more power back to the people. So you're going to see another element that's going to be more democratic. Is the 17th Amendment in 1913 will be added to the U.S. Constitution, which is direct election of U.S. senators by popular vote rather than by legislators. So traditionally, up until 1913, senators, the most prestigious job, was picked by state legislators. So basically, you elect your state legislators as reps, and then using the Republican element, amongst them from their peers, they would select 2 men, or 2 men at this point. Now we can obviously 2 women, but 2 men to go to D.C. to be the state or the state's representative in the Senate. So a much more control, kind of like the British Prime Minister system to a degree. But the 17th Amendment did away with that. Now people directly pick those people. This is also primary election as well, so you can see the transformation at the local level of government. City managers replaced mayors to make a city government more efficient and more honest. Fitness of voters was a view reduced the poor's ability to vote. More about qualified persons than everybody participating. So you have a couple things here. City managers will come in, replace mayors. So you're going to go from the mayor system, city council, to a manager council. Basically what you're going to have is you're going to hire people to run the city effectively instead of some buffoon or someone who has no knowledge of how to run a city. You're going to really look to get qualified people to run your city and be more efficient. And that kind of ties into the scientific method a little bit. You do it efficiently with qualified individuals or things. Now, there's going to be voter reduction to some degree because are you fit to be a voter? In the African Americans way, this is through literacy test, poll taxes, etc. But the goal for some of these, even some of the progressives, is to get the right people to vote. Meaning you need to be smart and know what you're voting. You can't just be Bill off the street that doesn't know anything. Politics of progressivism too. Jane Addams and the Hull House. Jane Addams founded a Hull House settlement house devoted to improving the lives of immigrant poor. It's an outdoor mission basically towards helping the poor. And when I say mission, it's not necessarily religious. It's more as helping people get better, get the feet under them. Workers moved to poor neighborhoods. Hull House instigated an array of reforms in Chicago, soon adapted elsewhere. Stronger buildings and sanitation codes, shorter working hours and safe labor conditions, and right to organize. They're going to basically go get these immigrants out of crap places and bid them into more sanitation, better living conditions, etc. Hull House, Florence Kelly, a veteran of the Hull House, went on to mobilize women's power as consumers as a force for social change. She's one of the most prominent Hull House workers here. The campaign for women's suffrage, which is probably one of the most famous progressive movements. By 1900, more than half the states had allowed women to vote in the local elections. At the state level, women had much more rights than at the federal level. Wyoming, Colorado, Idaho, and Utah had adopted full women's suffrage. Wyoming was the first, partly to get immigration for women to migrate to those states for the population. These states are still, besides Colorado, are relatively light compared to the rest of the country. And so they're going to try to lure families with that vote. Worked hard towards a constitutional giving women the right to vote. This will not happen until 1920. It would have probably happened sooner if it was not for World War I, and we'll get to that later. But the campaign for women's suffrage will really gain steam again in the early 1900s. Maternalist reform rested in the assumption the government should encourage women's capacity for bearing and raising children and enable them to be economically independent at the same time. Ironically enough, women were viewed as childbearing. The importance of how many kids they could have. There's a very important court case that actually, because of this, childbearing helps women in working conditions. Though it's convoluted, very misguided, it benefits women. Court ruled that women were weaker and had less endurance than men and had the labor affected the ability to reproduce, meaning if they work longer hours, they're not as strong as men, and their ability to carry children will be reduced, thus setting maximum working hours for women was legal. Meaning, we need to set women's working hours so they can carry children. Though very sexist, a very wrong mentality about it, it helps women work less hours. This led to future workmen's compensation laws as well, and this also led to pay gap between men and women, which is an unfortunate consequence. Oh, women, they can't work as much as men. So there's a good and bad with this, but the idea was really trying to get women from working these outlandishly long hours. But it was an interesting approach to it, obviously very, very misguided. The progressive presidents. Okay, this is the last section. We're sitting about almost 30 minutes here. This is getting through chapter 8 pretty quickly. Sorry if it's a little bit faster than normal, but, yay for weather. Now, the progressive presidents, one of the progressive presidents, I'll be honest, one of my favorite presidents, Teddy Roosevelt. And I think a lot of people would jump on that wagon as well. Very interesting man. Now, the three, and honestly all three progressive presidents are pretty good. Theodore Roosevelt, William Henry, Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson. And I'm going to tell you here that Taft did not get stuck in a bathtub. And I will tell you a little bit more about how that is a little inaccurate. He did get, I'll explain here in a little bit. Okay, first of them, Theodore Roosevelt, 1901. He is thrust into public light when Leon Chagosky assassinated William McKinley. William McKinley was literally shaking hands. Leon came up with a handkerchief over a gun, shot him. He was an anarchist, which is another thing we could talk about, but we're not going to right now. And Theodore Roosevelt was placed as the vice president to kind of keep him from being an active politician. Historically, the vice president is kind of, doesn't do a lot. Well, TR became the youngest ever to serve as president at 42. He's the youngest to serve, not to be elected. That is JFK, because JFK was directly elected as president, and he was younger when he was directly elected. Now, TR, because he's vice president, assumes the president is younger than when Kennedy was elected, but he's the youngest to serve. And when he runs for re-election, he will be the youngest to be elected at that point, but Kennedy will be younger than that. He's going to promote what's called the Square Deal, confront the problems of good and bad corporations. He's really going to go after the trust in these companies and going to get the name Trustbuster. He sued Northern Securities Company, J.P. Morgan. Court ordered the securities to be dissolved or broken up. And this is where we're going to start to see the breaking up of major corporations. He'll help get past the Health Board Act, power to regulate railroads and set rates. So you can see Teddy Roosevelt is a very, very active president. He once said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." And, that's how he ran his presidency. He will appoint John John Muir and the Spirit of Nationality. In 1872, Yellowstone was the first national park, and John Muir will organize the Sierra Club to preserve forests from uncontrolled logging. One of the things Roosevelt's going to push is the creation of more parks and more public land to be saved, or conservatism. Conservation movement. TR made the movement a federal policy at this point, which is unheard of. He's basically trying to limit big businesses' ability to acquire these lands for development. Relying on the advice of Gifford Pinnock, head of the U.S. Forest Service, TR ordered millions of acres be set for wildlife preserves. He did support use or natural resources, but with control and limitation. So basically, you can have oil and coal, but you need to do it with limitation and control. Okay, we could spend hours on Taft, or not Taft, but Roosevelt. In short, he runs again in 1904, is reelected, but he made the ill-famous statement, "I'm not going to run again." So he was president for about, 7.5 years, and he's going to leave office, and he's going to go on a world tour where he's going to go to Africa to do a massive hunt and bring back like 11,000 species to the United States. You can say, well, if he was a conservationist, why do he want to hunt? Well, he liked to go hunt, but he liked to hunt and control, and all the specimens he brought back were put in museums and such. He was a naturalist, and he did enjoy hunting. So not perfect man, obviously flawed, but he does that. He handpicks Howard Taft to be his president, or to succeed him. Taft did not want to be president necessarily, but when a personality like Teddy Roosevelt, you're not going to say no. Taft beat William Jennings Bryan. If you've heard any of my classes, William Jennings Bryan ran like 5 times for president and lost all times. Taft is a bigger man. He's probably one of the smartest presidents we've ever had. He wanted to be actually Supreme Court justice. That was his goal. He'd been served on several courts as a judge in lower years. He had been an ambassador to the Philippines. Or governor of the Philippines. So he's a very accomplished man. Anyway, he pursued antitrust policy even more aggressive than Roosevelt. Even went after Standard Oil. He actually broke up more trust than Roosevelt did. He supported the 16th Amendment, enacted gradual income tax, though that would not come about at this point. But he was definitely much more active on some fronts than Roosevelt even was. He gravitated towards more conservative party of the party, and though he was active on some fronts, he became more conservative than Roosevelt was, and he kind of went back to the status quo. Richard A. Bollinger, Secretary of the Interior, decided to return some land back to the public, which will set off a lot of outcry. By the way, we're on the Progressive President's slide too. Picknock, Guilford, the guy that was the head of the U.S. Forest Service, accused Ballinger of colluding with business interests, basically getting paid off and all this. Taft fired Pinnock for this insubordination that resulted in a rift with the progressives. They're like, whoa, this is Roosevelt's man. Roosevelt found out about it, was mad. And that was not the only reason. The other one was it was like a lawsuit. I can't remember exactly, but anyway, the resulting was TR got mad. There was a fallout between TR, Teddy Roosevelt, and Taft, and he runs for the Republican nomination. Now, the Republican Guard in the old party, they didn't want Roosevelt back. So Roosevelt, not to be outdone, creates what's called the Bull Moose Party, one of the best third-party creations ever in the history of the United States. So the election in 1912, four-way contest. Wilson will be the Democratic president nominee, followed by Taft as Republican nominee. Roosevelt will be the Bull Moose Party, the third party, and socialist Eugene Debs, who will run several times as a socialist candidate. Now, it's really a three-man race. Debs has no shot. So it's a wide range of candidates. It was the battle between Wilson and Roosevelt over the whole role of the federal government and securing economic freedom that galvanized the people or the public. Going to Progressive Presidents 3, New Freedom versus New Nationalism. Wilson insisted that democracy must be rejuvenated by restoring market competition and free government, free from big business domination. So a little bit more of the progressive type elements that Teddy Roosevelt had initially did, but even a step further. New Freedom envisioned the federal government strengthening antitrust laws, protecting workers, and encouraging small business. So that New Freedom was Wilson's plan. TR called his plan New Nationalism. Controlling and direct power of the government could restore the liberty of the oppressed, meaning more government oversight, new taxes on fortunes, industries, welfare states, ideas, women's suffrage, and so on. So there's a lot of substance behind Roosevelt's plan, but basically the government would take the lead more actively on some things. In the end, though, Wilson will win. I don't have it up here on the slide, but if you look at it, it's a very close election as far as the popular vote. Wilson carries only about 42% of the popular vote. Teddy Roosevelt carries like 30-some%. But Wilson wins a huge majority of the states. And you look at it, Roosevelt only won a handful of states, more than Taft did. Taft only won a couple states, I think, maybe one or two. At the end of the day, Taft and Roosevelt split the votes. If either only one of them ran, they probably actually beat Wilson. But because Roosevelt and Taft were in this tiff, this allows Wilson to win, not with a majority, I should say, as a public support. Because if you look at the votes, I mean, you combine Taft and Roosevelt's, they beat Wilson in a lot of these states he won. So Wilson becomes president, a very smart man, very capable. In this case, all three men were very competent people, and they would all be good presidents. Wilson's first term, Taft and TR split and shared a sweeping victory for Wilson through only 42% of total vote. Wilson was the first president to hold press conferences, something today that is kind of comical. Passed the Underwood Tariff, reduced duties on imports, and imposed a gradual income tax on the richest 5%. That will ultimately come with the 16th Amendment and the income tax. They will pass the Clayton Act of 1914, gave teeth to the unions and the ability to strike. Keating-Owen Act, outlawing child labor and the manufacturing goods sold in interstate commerce. So Wilson kind of gets going, keeps the progressive movement going. The expanding role of government. This is the final slide. The progressive president's 4. Created the Federal Reserve System, 12 regional banks to ensure assurance of currency aid, banks in danger of failing, and influence interest rates. It also creates a Federal Trade Commission to investigate and prohibit unfair business activities. Okay, so this gets us through Chapter 18. A lot of stuff is going on here. We have a drastic shift in the United States in the progressive era. We have 3 progressive presidents, Teddy Roosevelt, Howard Taft, William Henry Taft, and Woodrow Wilson. All 3 are very effective presidents, do a lot of good for the country. That being said, we have changes across the board. You start to see safety standards introduced. You start to see the work hour reduced, so there's reforms at the workplace, safer work conditions. You have trusts busted up, corporations are limited with Taft and Roosevelt. You have the muckrakers who expose these problems to get the public on board. You're going to have democratic changes, the direct primary, electing candidates for your party, and then direct election of senators with the 17th Amendment. You're going to have more efficient government functions with like mayors at city level, with the managerial hiring of people that are qualified to run things. So there's a lot of things that go on here in the progressive movement. Okay, that is conclusion of Chapter 18. I will post the reaction quiz and the Chapter 18 quiz in the next couple days. We will probably start Chapter 19 Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. Like I said, I am gone Monday, Tuesday, so everything that I will put out there will probably be video recorded, and I'll try to keep you guys up to date. And also, final note, once again, is the test will probably be pushed back a day or two, and I'll give you more information on it as we get to. Thank you.